It was a crisp autumn morning when I first noticed the subtle changes in the neighborhood. The leaves were turning golden, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. I had lived in Maplewood Heights for over 3 decades, and in that time, I had seen the community evolve from a quiet, rural enclave to a bustling, suburban haven. My property, a sprawling 5-acre estate, was a testament to years of hard work and dedication. I had built my dream home here, complete with a workshop, a private pond, and, yes, a helipad. The helipad had been a necessity for my business, which specialized in delivering critical medical equipment to hospitals across the region. At 62, I had earned every inch of my property through sheer determination and grit. The Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, HOA, had been a relatively benign presence for most of those years. When I first moved in, the HOA was little more than a formality, a group of well-meaning neighbors who organized community events and maintained the common areas. But as the neighborhood grew, so did the HOA's influence. New homes sprang up, and with them came new residents, many of whom had different ideas about what our community should look like. The trouble began when a new HOA president was elected. Her name was Victoria Kensington, a 45-year-old corporate lawyer with a penchant for perfection and an ego to match. She had moved into Maplewood Heights just 2 years prior, and from the moment she arrived, she made it clear that she intended to modernize the neighborhood. Her VY shown of suburban perfection was one of uniformity, identical lawns, identical houses, and, most importantly, identical rules. At first, I didn't pay much attention to Victoria's grand plans. My property was grandfathered in, meaning that the existing structures and land use were exempt from the new HOA regulations. But as the months went by, it became clear that Victoria had a different interpretation of the term grandfathered. She began to scrutinize every aspect of my property, from the width of my driveway to the height of my workshop. It started with a few warning letters, then escalated to daily fines and threats of legal action. The final straw came when I decided to repave my driveway. I had filed the necessary permits with the county, but Victoria insisted that I needed HOA approval. When I proceeded without her blessing, the conflict escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Victoria's campaign against me began in earnest. She called special board meetings to discuss my flagrant violations and the detrimental impact my property was having on the community's aesthetics. She even went so far as to measure the height of my workshop with a laser tool from the road, all while wearing that infuriating smirk of hers. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Charles," she warned during one particularly heated confrontation at my gate. "Just sign the compliance agreement, and this all goes away." But I wasn't about to give in to her bullying. My father had taught me never to back down from a fight, and I wasn't about to start now. I contacted my attorney, Mark, who had been a close friend since college. He confirmed what I already knew. Victoria was overstepping her authority. The grandfather clause was part of my deed restrictions and couldn't be arbitrarily revoked. "This is blatant harassment," Mark said as he re-VYEU'd the documentation. "Victoria is trying to make an example of you. She wants to show everyone who's boss. We filed an injunction, but these things take time in the courts." In the meantime, Victoria didn't wait. As the 30-day deadline approached, I received increasingly threatening communications. Board members began stopping by unannounced, demanding inspections. I refused entry each time, but the pressure was mounting. Then came a final blow. While I was out of town citing my daughter after her surgery, Victoria called an emergency vote to revoke my grandfather clause entirely. The meeting was deliberately scheduled for a time when I couldn't attend, and despite protests from several sensible neighbors, the vote passed 8-5. I returned home to find a formal notice taped to my door stating that I had 30 days to bring all structures into HOA compliance. This would essentially require demolishing half my workshop, remo-VYing my boat storage, and decommissioning my helipad. I was furious, but I wasn't defeated. I had built my business on the principle of finding solutions where others saw only obstacles. If Victoria thought she could block my access to my own property, she was sorely mistaken. That night, as I sat on my porch looking at the mountain of junk cars blocking my driveway, a plan began to form. Victoria had focused on the road because that's how she saw the world: narrow, conventional, by the book. But I had never been a by-the-book kind of man. That's how I had built my business, my home, my life. I made 3 calls that night. The first was to Mark, outlining my plan and confirming its legality. The second was to my business partner, and the third was to Mike, an old Vietnam veteran who operated a heavy-lift helicopter VYC that we occasionally contracted for urgent medical equipment deliveries. "You want me to do what?" Mike asked, then laughed long and hard when I explained. "Charles, I've known you for 20 years, but this takes the cake. Count me in." By morning, everything was set. I invited several neighbors over for coffee on Sunday morning. They had to park on the street and walk up the long driveway around the car barricade. We sat on my back patio, discussing the situation. "I don't understand how she can get away with this," Mrs. Thompson, a 72-year-old widow who had been my neighbor from the beginning, said as she stirred her coffee with trembling hands. "In all my years here, I've never seen such bullying. It's about precedent," Ted, my neighbor of 20 years, explained. "If Victoria can force Charles to comply, none of us are safe." Just then, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors grew in the distance. "What's that?" Ted asked, looking up. "That," I said with a smile as my ride. A Bell 205 heavy-lift helicopter appeared over the tree line, right on schedule. The neighbors watched in amazement as it hovered above my property, then slowly descended onto my perfectly legal, FAA-approved helipad behind the house. Within minutes, Mike and I were walking back to the patio. His weathered face broke into a grin as he surveyed Victoria's barricade from our vantage point. "So these are the cars causing all the trouble?" he asked, sipping the coffee I handed him. "They certainly are," I replied. "But first, we need my tractor. It's locked behind my gates, and I'll need it to move those cars once we get them off my driveway." "No problem," Mike said, patting my shoulder. "Your John Deere? We can lift that with our eyes closed. This will be a Sunday joyride compared to what we did in Nam." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood's text chain. By noon, nearly half the neighborhood had gathered on the street. Some brought lawn chairs, others had coolers and snacks. Children played while adults chatted excitedly. It had turned into an impromptu Sunday social event, unlike anything our community had seen in years. Victoria arrived, looking concerned. Her polo shirt was perfectly pressed despite the weekend. "What's going on here?" she demanded, spotting the helicopter on my property. Before anyone could answer, Mike fired up the helicopter. Its massive rotors began turning slowly at first, then faster until they were a blur above the aircraft. The sound washed over us like a wave, drowning out Victoria's protests. Her face paled as she realized what was happening. She rushed toward my property line, while VYing her arms frantically, but the rotor wash kept her at bay, messing up her carefully styled hair. The helicopter lifted off from my helipad, hovered momentarily, then moved directly over the pile of junk cars. A steel cable descended from its underbelly, ending in a heavy-duty harness system. Mike's ground crew 3 professionals I had flown in that morning expertly secured the harness around the first car. With practiced efficiency, they attached the lifting apparatus, gave the signal, and stepped back. Within minutes, the helicopter lifted the first car effortlessly into the air. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. I stood beside my tractor, ready to help move the cars once they were lifted from the driveway. "You can't do this," Victoria shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the helicopter and the cheers. One by one, each car was lifted and carefully deposited in an open area of my property. After each placement, I climbed onto my tractor and arranged the junk cars in a neat row, well away from the driveway. The combination of aerial and ground operations was a perfectly choreographed dance of machinery. The entire operation took less than 2 hours. By mid-afternoon, my driveway was completely clear. As the last car was moved, spontaneous applause broke out among the spectators. Several people hugged me. Mrs. Thompson was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Even some board members who had supported Victoria looked impressed. Mike landed the helicopter one final time. As he stepped out, several neighbors asked to take pictures with him. He obliged with good humor, playing up his role as the cavalry. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully orchestrated plan literally up in the air. Her face had progressed through various shades of red during the operation. Now, as Mike shut down the helicopter, she stormed over to me. "This is outrageous," she spluttered. "You have no right to move those vehicles. The HOA placed them there legally." I handed her a document of my own the emergency injunction Mark had secured first thing that morning. "Actually, the court disagrees," I said calmly. "This restraining order prohibits the HOA from blocking access to my property. And since you claimed ownership of these vehicles by placing them here, I've simply relocated your property to a more convenient location. They're all there." I pointed to the neat row of junk cars now sitting on my lawn. "You can pick them up anytime, but I suggest you bring appropriate transportation. My helicopter isn't a free-sare VYC." Victoria snatched the paper from my hand, scanned it, then crumpled it in her fist. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're right about that," I agreed. "But the next move is yours. Choose wisely." As Victoria stormed off to her waiting luxury SUV, Ted leaned in and whispered, "I've lived here 20 years and never seen anything like this. You've given this neighborhood something it's been missing for a long time." "What's that?" I asked. "It's backbone," he replied. The following week was a whirlwind. Video of the helicopter operation went viral locally, then nationally. HOA Helicopter Hero became my unwanted nickname. Local news vans parked on our street, interviewing neighbors about the junk car showdown. Victoria tried to control the narrative, claiming I had violated numerous regulations with my dangerous aerial stunt. But the footage spoke for itself, a professional operation conducted safely and efficiently. The image of Victoria standing there, mouth agape, as the helicopter lifted the first car had already become the neighborhood's favorite photo. More importantly, the incident forced our community to confront the HOA's increasing overreach. Many residents who had stayed silent now came forward with their own stories of harassment and arbitrary rule enforcement. I was fined $200 because my trash can was visible from the street for 3 hours, one neighbor revealed. "I was told my American flag was mounted at the wrong angle," said another, a Vietnam veteran like Mike. "My grandchildren's chalk drawings on my own driveway earned me a citation," added Mrs. Thompson. An emergency HOA meeting was called. The community center was packed, standing room only, with people spilling out into the parking lot. For 3 hours, neighbor after neighbor spoke about their experiences. The consistent theme wasn't opposition to HOA standards, but rather the dictatorial way they were being enforced. Victoria attempted to defend the board's actions, but when she called the car blockade a necessary visualization of non-compliance issues, the room erupted in derision. "You blocked a man's access to his own home," shouted someone from the back. "What if there had been a medical emergency?" asked another. When Victoria tried to suggest I was the one endangering the community with my helicopter stunt, Mike stood up. "I've flown medevac missions in 3 wars," he said. "That operation was textbook perfect and safer than your morning commute." The vote was overwhelming. 8 of the 11 board members, including Victoria, were removed. A new interim board was elected with a mandate to review and reform the HOA regulations. Ted, who had been my staunch supporter, was elected interim president. His first official act was to formally recognize all grandfather clauses in the neighborhood and establish a transparent process for property improvements. As he signed the resolution, Ted handed me the pen. "You earned this," he said. "Some battles are worth fighting." As for the junk cars, they remained on my lawn for nearly 2 weeks, becoming something of a local tourist attraction. Children would ride their bikes past my property to see them. Someone even created a hashtag, the Wellington's Folly. Victoria was legally responsible for their removal, but seemed in no hurry to arrange it. Finally, I had them professionally hauled away at my own expense, a small price, to pay for community harmony. I even restored several and donated them to a vocational school's auto shop program, turning lemons into lemonade. Ted called it when he helped me deliver the refurbished cars to the school. I said, the students' excitement made every penny worthwhile. 6 months later, our neighborhood has transformed under Ted's leadership. The new HOA board operates with transparency and respect for property rights. We've established clear guidelines that protect community standards while respecting NDVY dual homeowners. Victoria sold her house within weeks of losing her position. The rumor is she moved to a gated community with even stricter regulations, probably where she belongs. My helipad remains active, though I use it sparingly. It's proven valuable several times for community emergencies, including airlifting misses. Thompson to the hospital during a heart attack last month. The doctor said the rapid transport saved her life. I guess that unauthorized structure has its uses after all, she told me afterward with a wink. The most profound change has been in our community spirit. The shared experience of standing up to tyranny brought us together in ways we hadn't experienced in decades. Our monthly neighborhood gatherings rotate between different homes, including mine. Last weekend, as we enjoyed a barbecue on my lawn, Ted raised his glass. To Charles, he said, who taught us all that sometimes you have to rise above to move forward. As laughter and applause rippled through the gathering, I looked around at my neighbor's friends, old and new, and realized Victoria had inadvertently given us a precious gift. In her attempt to control and DVY to us, she had instead united us around values worth protecting: respect, fairness, and the right to enjoy what we've worked our whole lives to build. And as for Victoria's lasting legacy, well, there's a saying in our neighborhood now: whenever someone faces an impossible roadblock, time to call in the helicopter. Because if there's one lesson we've all learned, it's this: when someone builds a wall to block your path, sometimes the best way forward isn't through it or around it, it's over it. The story of the helicopter and the junk cars became a legend in Maplewood Heights. It was a tale of resilience, ingenuity, and the power of community. Over time, the incident became a symbol of standing up to injustice and finding creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. As for me, I continue to live my life as I always had, with integrity, determination, and a willingness to fight for what was right. My helipad remained a testament to my belief that sometimes the sky's the limit. And whenever I heard the distant whir of helicopter blades, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that in Maplewood Heights, we had proven that no matter how high the walls, there was always a way to rise above them. The story of the helicopter and the junk cars didn't just stay within Maplewood Heights. It spread like wildfire, becoming a symbol of resistance against overbearing authority. News outlets picked up the story, and soon I was receiving calls from people across the country who were facing similar battles with their HOAs. Some wanted ad VYC, others just want to share their own stories of standing up to unreasonable rules. It was humbling to realize that my fight had resonated with so many. In the months that followed, our neighborhood became a model for how communities could balance individual dual rights with collective standards. Ted and the new HOA board worked tirelessly to create a more inclusive and transparent system. They established a committee to review all existing regulations, ensuring that they were fair and reasonable. Homeowners were encouraged to voice their concerns, and for the first time in years, it felt like the HOA was working for the community, not against it. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of a Grandfather Clause Protection Act, which ensured that long-standing properties like mine couldn't be targeted by future boards. It was a small VY Tory, but one that meant a lot to those of us who had been here since the beginning. Just when things seemed to be settling down, a new challenge emerged. A developer had purchased a large plot of land on the outskirts of Maplewood Heights, with plans to build a massive housing complex. The project promised to bring in hundreds of new residents, along with increased traffic, noise, and strain on local resources. Worse yet, the developer had ties to Victoria Kensington, who had quietly been working behind the scenes to push the project forward. The news sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Many residents were concerned about the impact on our community's character and infrastructure. Others worried about the potential for even stricter HOA rules, as the developer was rumored to favor a more controlled, uniform aesthetic. Ted called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. The community center was packed once again, with neighbors spilling out into the parking lot. The mood was tense, but there was also a sense of determination. We had faced down Victoria before, and we weren't about to let her or her developer friends destroy what we had built. "We need to fight this," Ted said, addressing the crowd. "But we need to do it the right way. We'll organize, we'll petition, and we'll make sure our voices are heard. This isn't just about preserving our neighborhood, it's about protecting our way of life." The room erupted in applause. It was clear that the spirit of unity we had forged during the helicopter incident was still alive and well. The fight against the development project was long and grueling. We organized petitions, attended town hall meetings, and even hired a lawyer to challenge the developer's permits. It was a Goliath situation, but we were determined to stand our ground. Victoria, now working as a consultant for the developer, tried every trick in the book to push the project through. She used her connections to fast-track approvals and dismissed our concerns as anti-progress. But we weren't backing down. We had learned from our pre-VYS battle that when we stood together, we were a force to be reckoned with. One of the most powerful moments came when Mrs. Thompson, now in her mid-70s, stood up at a town hall meeting and delivered an impassioned speech about what Maplewood Heights meant to her. "This isn't just a neighborhood," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's our home. It's where we've raised our families, built our lives, and created memories. We won't let anyone take that away from us." Her words struck a chord, not just with the residents of Maplewood Heights, but with the wider community. Local media picked up the story, and soon, the developer was facing pressure from all sides. After months of fighting, we finally received the news we had been hoping for. The developer withdrew their plans, citing community concerns as the reason. It was a hard-won Tory, and one that left us all feeling a mix of relief and pride. That evening, we gathered at my house for a celebration. The mood was jubilant, with neighbors sharing stories, laughter, and toasts to our success. As I looked around at the faces of my friends and neighbors, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. We had faced down not one, but two major challenges, and each time, we had emerged stronger and more united. Ted raised his glass for a toast. "To Maplewood Heights," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To our community, our home, and the incredible people who make it what it is. We've proven that when we stand together, there's nothing we can't overcome." The crowd erupted in cheers, and for a moment, it felt like we were in Wein-Seibel. In the years that followed, Maplewood Heights continued to thrive. The new HOA board, under Ted's leadership, became a model for other communities struggling with similar issues. We hosted workshops and shared our experiences, hoping to inspire others to stand up for their rights and protect their homes. As for me, I continued to live my life much as I always had. My helipad remained a symbol of my independence and determination, and I used it sparingly, mostly for emergencies or the occasional joyride with Mike. The junk cars had long since been removed, but their legacy lived on in the stories we told and the lessons we had learned. Victoria Kensington faded into obscurity, though rumors occasionally surfaced about her involvement in other controversial projects. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. She had been so focused on control and perfection that she had missed the true meaning of community. Years later, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. The battles, the Tories, the friendships, it had all shaped me in ways I could never have imagined. Maplewood Heights was more than just a neighborhood. It was a testament to the power of resilience, unity, and the human spirit. As the sound of helicopter blades echoed in the distance, I smiled. It was Mike coming to sit for one last flight. We had both grown older, but our friendship had only deepened over the years. As we soared above the treetops, I looked down at the community I had fought so hard to protect. It was beautiful, not because of its uniformity or perfection, but because of the people who called it home. When we landed, Mike turned to me with a grin. "You know, Charles," he said, "you've left quite a legacy. Not just here, but everywhere. People talk about the guy who stood up to the HOA, who fought for what was right, and who reminded us all that sometimes the best way forward is over the wall." I chuckled, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. "I didn't do it alone," I replied. "It was the community that made it happen." I just gave him a little nudge. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Maplewood Heights, I knew that my work here was done. The neighborhood was in good hands, and the lessons we had learned would continue to guide us for generations to come. And as for the helicopter, well, it would always be a part of our story, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that no matter how high the walls, there's always a way to rise above them. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.